Patrick Lynn. I'm the Executive Director at Mosquito Control right here in Collier. I haven't been in existence since 1950, but the organization has. I was born just 5 years ago, so I'm just... Okay, so maybe you moved to Florida thinking that it was going to be paradise, right? Well, that's what you might see, and it right away, usually when people see pictures like this, they start to get heebie-jeebies and they feel uncomfortable. But it's very true that we do see, you know, any cats in the room kind of thing. But when I point at the screen, you won't see it. So what we'll do is I'll take you through here a little bit about what we do know, what I don't know, some of you history buffs may know more than me, but the earliest residents to Southwest Florida, how mosquitoes have impacted Florida history, certainly in a public health and a comfort sort of realms. Development of mosquito control in Florida, should say somewhere around there, development of air conditioning in Florida too, right? Certainly on a day like today, you can appreciate how wonderful air conditioning is. And I'll tell you a little bit about the district and how it works today and what we have in terms of best practices. So these would be the Colusa, the Native American tribe that occupied this area long time ago. And my best understanding is that they, the higher your rank in the tribe, the closer you got to live to the ocean, or to the Gulf, excuse me. And if you're up higher and closer to the water, then you get the benefit of the sea breeze and thus have fewer bites. And that actually looks so tidy and organized and lovely. But it was a long time ago, so there's a fair amount of speculation. This, however, is a real photograph taken probably mid to late 1800s. And it looks like they have sort of camping gear on their heads there, but that's, those are hats representing their particular rank in the organization. Some of the natives to South Florida had some of their own remedies for ridding themselves of mosquitoes. And one of them, there were several actually, but the smoke was probably one of the most popular means by which that try to keep the mosquitoes down. And you can see in the background there, you can see that they're sort of in a patch with all that palmetto and the pine and such that we see here. And let's see here, the Native Americans used garfish oil and alligator or bear grease to rub on their skin. And I think that this provided a physical barrier to, in some cases, to the mosquitoes. I've done a lot of coincidental to work flying around the Bahamas and the Caribbean, and when it comes to mosquitoes and no-see-ums in that region, that part of the world, they actually just would dump motor oil on each other and cover their skin so that they wouldn't be bitten. Because as you know, that can be a miserable affair. So, and here's a cracker. They used smudge pots, which buckets of dirt, burning black mangrove wood and such, and then they'd throw a rag in on top of it. And there's nothing in this photo, but you can see, if you're a longer time resident, you recognize that right away as a wintertime scene. Not just because it's black and white, but because the cypress are free of their needles. And I wonder just how much value that piece of real estate, that person standing on there, is worth today. It'd be quite remarkable. So here's a, you know what, if somebody showed me a picture of this and said, okay, this is what's waiting for you. If you're a pioneer, I would say, well, don't sign me up for that, because it looks to be a fairly miserable existence. But let's test your knowledge. When did Florida become a state?
1837.
I have 1845, but perhaps 18 something something. Okay. There was the congressman who suggested that they should vote against statehood by saying that the land would never become habitable due to swamps, quagmires, alligators, and mosquitoes. And it was well known by this time that at certain times of the year, usually in the springtime, that the mosquitoes were abundant in such numbers as to kill livestock, which is as recently as 1989 we've had that problem. Usually doesn't make the Naples Daily News because it's bad for tourism, but we had a bad salt marsh season this year. I see some heads nodding, which, yeah, where were you? Okay, yeah, there's nothing we could have done to prevent it, and I'll certainly get to that in just a little bit. But the salt marsh mosquitoes that come out in the springtime can be abundant in such numbers as to kill livestock, and certainly if you live here and you live in a covered wagon and you don't have air conditioning, it's probably a pretty icky situation. We're really quite blessed to have what we have. So, yellow fever, which is transmitted by the yellow fever mosquito, which you will know as the Aedes aegypti or Zika mosquito, which is rapidly diminishing in popularity. Jacksonville, circa, let's see here, 1888, 4,000 people got yellow fever, and more than 10% of those died. And the reason it's called yellow fever is because the virus itself affects the liver. It's a hemorrhagic fever and causes jaundice and turns your eyes yellow and your skin yellow. And so there was a kind of an exodus at that point in time, and certainly that's when there was I wonder if mosquitoes are causing this problem. Yellow fever is not contagious from person to person, but it is contagious through the vector. It's not contagious. It is transmissible through the vector mosquito. So the Aedes aegypti, which lives with people, bites a person. And if she has the yellow fever virus, transmits it to the person, they become infected. The virus replicates enough so that they have what's called enough viremia. The mosquito then goes, bites that person, bites another person, transmits the disease.
What's the difference between yellow fever and malaria?
Well, they're carried by different mosquitoes, for starters, and malaria is still so present in the world and so dangerous. It's also a viral disease, but it kills up to 750,000 people a year still in the world. We don't have malaria endemic in Florida primarily because of DDT. So when people say, well, chemicals and DDT, it actually was something that was so effective. And we've got some remarkable pictures of that here coming up. So that's an image of Jacksonville, and it's not on fire. They were just burning these pots to try to shoo away the Aedes aegypti mosquito. If we did that today, Mosquito Control came in and lit a fire in the middle of the street, and it wouldn't be taken very well, I don't think. So, as often is the case, the military in the United States comes across a solution to how to get a job done, how to keep their troops healthy, and so on. It's very hard to fight a war if they all have yellow fever and such. And some of you may recognize the name Walter Reed. If you've been in the Northeast or in Virginia, you know about Walter Reed Medical Center and so on. And Walter Reed allowed himself to be bit by yellow fever infected mosquito, got very sick, and then said, "See, I told you they carry yellow fever." Yeah, we don't do that so much today. It doesn't make as much sense, but it's, you know, if you're going to make a small wager, it certainly is a final way to prove that the disease is vectored by mosquitoes. So, this gentleman here, Dr. Porter, is considered to, is a very handsome gentleman there and very regal looking. He is the father or grandfather of mosquito control, and suggested strongly after a dengue epidemic circa 1922 that Florida really elevate the profession of mosquito control to a status where we have districts and professionals involved in it. And the first, actually he organized, it was actually first called the Florida Anti-Mosquito Association. I should remember all this because it was on my director's exam, but I'll tell you, in the day-to-day, you kind of, these things drop out of your mind. Indian River Mosquito Control on the East Coast is established in 1925, and that is actually one of their, I would show you that, but that's one of their little, looks like a Jeep, a Willy's. As a matter of fact, Collier used something very similar, but not for another 30 years, actually. And there it is. There's the truck that was actually borrowed from the city of Naples by the, I think it was the Naples Anti-Mosquito League or Association, some bizarre name. And smoke was the way to get mosquitoes under control, and Naples was about 6 square miles at the time in 1950. And so the purchase of this truck, actually the borrowing of the truck, was how we got started. Today we employ in excess of 30 people. We have 2 going on 3 PhDs in-house, a $15–16 million budget, and so on. So it really has come a long way. In 1963, I want to make sure I get that year right for you, the district expanded substantially. So we went from 6 square miles to nearly 100 square miles. This would include what we now know as between Airport Road and where 75 is, and north and south to the county lines and so on. And so the district bought some Beechcraft aircraft, and this isn't just before the crash, it's actually thermal fogging. They used to put a pesticide. It was something along the lines of Baytex, and then they would mix it with diesel oil or diesel fuel and produce a fog off of the hot engines, and that was quite effective, actually. And if you've been a resident of Collier for a very long time, you will remember the DC-3s rumbling over at treetop level and leaving everyone in the fog. So times have changed. This, I think, is a shot from New Jersey, circa early 1940s. And just so you know here, it says there's a young man, I wonder if he's still with us, actually. It says DDT, powerful insecticide, harmless to humans. It's kind of an odd juxtaposition, because this kind of thing, I will just sort of say gently that kind of trust in an organization that is trying to manage and further public health doesn't exist anymore. The very first thing that I hear on the phone is usually one of 2 or 3 things. First one is, I'm a taxpayer and you all chuckle because you know that's not going to end well. Another one is, have you done your research? Sure, have. But gone are the days where trust of that level is available to us, and certainly we know why. These are circa early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, Marco Island. These are actual Collier Mosquito Control aircraft, DC-3s, C-47s, however you want to phrase it. And they were thermal fogging, and they used to fly in an echelon formation with sort of a half of a wing, and then they would all, right at daybreak, take off and fly parallel to one another with one sort of behind and to the side, and whoever was in the front was the leader. They'd get to the end of the run and they'd all go do a turn and then come back, and they'd get this big, big cloud of pesticide, and it was remarkably effective. Unfortunately, they weren't even at 300 feet, they were at treetop level, and those are radial engines. So these were cowboys, because I don't know if any of you are history buffs have aviation history in mind, but radial engines are about as reliable as a teenager. So they're constantly, what they say, blowing jugs. So the engines would quit, and then they'd have to limp back to the airport. And we've got a few accidents on record back in the day. Now, it doesn't, this is, it looks modern. It's really quite amazing. The Winnebago you see down here on the bottom, this is a Skyvan, Shorts Brothers. Unfortunately, that brings us only to 1970s technology. However, everything that's inside of it is much, much newer. The helicopter up on the top left there, we have 5 of those. Those are MD-500s. They were all built in the 1980s. So the average age of our fleet right now is about the same as it was for the mosquito control district that was operating in the 80s. Our average fleet age is somewhere around 40 to 45 years. And so we're looking into the future in terms of more modern, quieter, faster aircraft. And the materials we use in such relatively small amounts compared to the old days. The DC-3s, they would pump 600 gallons of that Baytex into the ship. A full load for us is 120 gallons in the Skyvan, and that's more than 30,000 acres. So in 3 nights, we can do the entire district, 400 plus square miles now. So it's pretty remarkable. Oh, I forgot to show you. This came from one of our, does this look like a tail maybe, right? But if you've got a mosquito problem, children used to stand in the doorway, according to the history, and it was their job to get the mosquitoes off of the people coming into the home, which is quite remarkable. And this was given to us by some of our Native American friends to one of our commissioners. So it's not actually that old, but the technology has been around for a long time. And since we don't have tails, we get one of those. Okay, now here we are, present day, but old mosquitoes. Same problem, different paradigm, different setup. We've got Aedes aegypti, Aedes albopictus. These are the 2 bugs that can carry Zika, dengue, chikungunya, yellow fever. Sounds like they all come from Africa. Well, they do. It's also the same mosquito that would come from Africa, the Aedes aegypti. It lives amongst human beings. It is a great concern to us, and it is biologically different enough from other mosquitoes so that we're forced to run a separate program to manage Aedes aegypti. The Anopheles mosquito is the one that will carry malaria. Do we have them? Yes. That's why they're all on the list here. We have lots of Anopheles mosquitoes, especially pretty much from about this time of year all the way through October. We'll see an awful lot of them. But we won't see malaria because you have mosquito control here to keep you safe. Culex of the variety Nigra palpus carries West Nile virus, and we have not seen very much yet this year. What happens is it becomes more prevalent in the bird populations first, and then it'll eventually spill over into the human population.
What's SLE?
St. Louis encephalitis,
Okay, thank you.
which we have at least 3 types of encephalitis which are vectored by mosquitoes that are present here. So we have eastern equine. We had a equine encephalitis outbreak 7, 8 years ago, 6 years ago, somewhere in there. And we went through an awful lot of chemical. And that is something that horse owners, if you are a horse owner, you can certainly vaccinate against eastern equine encephalitis, which is a good thing to do. Nuisance bugs, the Aedes taeniorhynchus. You'll never forget that again because that's the bug, that's the Saltmarsh mosquito that was making everybody nuts this spring. That's another one of those things that you hear in every phone call. I'm a taxpayer, These are people that say, I've lived here for a number of years and I've never seen it this bad. Well, memories tend to be short, and what we experienced this year is not abnormal. As a matter of fact, it was typical in days gone by, but it's only a nuisance mosquito, but that's not going to be enough. We went from hearing from a lot of activists that you need to stop spraying, you need to stop spraying, and then this year it was, you need to start spraying, you need to do that. So nobody's happy, and what happened is this mosquito can vector dog heartworm, but mostly it's just a fierce biter, and it's so abundant, makes you miserable, and we have so much habitat that produces them. And you might say, well, where are they coming from? Well, they're coming from the salt marshes that are down to the east and south of the district. How are we going to treat them in the future? Well, we're working with our friends here at Rookery and Picayune and so on to try to put some larvicides in there. It's just a bacteria. And you know what? We've all read the thing that said DDT is safe and non-toxic to humans. The bacteria that we use is well established, very, very effective. And it's our hope that we can get some larvicide in those areas and create a little buffer. Yes?
Are all the mosquitoes that we're talking about that are problematic, are they all female?
Only the females bite.
Yeah.
That is correct.
And now they're doing an experiment, or I think they are, in the Keys.
Yes.
To release sterilized male mosquitoes?
Right. In a very small area, size of a few acres, the Keys are releasing a Wolbachia infected mosquito, male mosquito, which the offspring are not viable. So
When will that experiment be, when will the results be considered valid enough for that to be a standard of treatment?
I am not certain of that. I will say this, however, which is that the academic side of things is very optimistic that it's going to be effective. Those who are in academia who straddle both the control side, the public health side, and the academic side kind of chuckle. And then once you leave academia and mosquito control, you have this culture of, no GMO in my backyard kind of thing. So if it's successful, it has so many hurdles to pass before it becomes commonplace. And you might say, well, the Keys is the worst place to start this. The previous director there, he was all about Oxitec and getting these GMO mosquitoes out there and so on. In theory, it's really good. And it may work to some extent. There are some very big problems right at the outset, which is, number one, depends what species of mosquito you're trying to use. What they don't tell you is that the females aren't interested in those Wolbachia infected males. I guess they don't have the right hair or something. They don't look right. Another problem is, at least what we see as a big problem, is that if there's a release of mosquitoes, which are very expensive, and then we have disease or we have an increased number of mosquitoes, we go and treat, we kill those. And so what we do is we essentially terminate our seed corn and that sort of thing. So there are very complex things at play here which make it challenging at best. And I'm sure that you've all read or seen Jurassic Park, right? You know, that life will find a way and so on. It's not even really necessarily what they're doing in the Keys is not to be considered genetically modified is a bit of an exaggeration. They're fed a bacteria which causes a little change so that the reproductive cycle is ineffective, or that the junior mosquitoes won't make it to adulthood. Fascinating part is that immediately in the research, they can see that the females that are in the field that are wild know that something's up. Ladies. So that intuition, you know, mosquitoes actually they don't think per se, they're programmed to do things. And they are programmed to survive, just like we all are. So that's a very interesting question. Yes, sir?
Is that the same process that was being experimented that they used at the Cayman Islands?
To the best of my knowledge, there is.
That seemed to work pretty well.
They're isolated enough so that you can do that kind of thing. If you live on an island, the amount of real estate that's involved is quite effective. There was a question back. Yes, sir.
Brazil done it about almost 2 years ago now on the Zika mosquitoes. Released the genetically altered to keep them sterile, I think.
Right.
Have you heard about that or know anything about that?
A lot of these technical questions would be geared for our research department. I will say that in Brazil they use some rather they're very effective measures of minimizing the mosquitoes, but it wouldn't be tolerated in the United States, generally speaking. Most of the problems that they have with Aedes aegypti are in slums and places where there are man-made containers and such. So the health department, for lack of a better term, will just go in there and start fogging in the houses. That's really where they need to get, because that's where the mosquitoes are. So, as a matter of fact, at one point in time, many years ago, Aedes aegypti was eliminated in a lot of equatorial regions. The United States did not play a part in that eradication, so we may have been a source for mosquitoes that made it back into the tropics. So our hands are always dirty to a certain extent in terms of what has transpired. The Aedes aegypti mosquito, however, I think at some point there was a statement that it's like a cockroach. It's almost impossible to kill. Part of the reason that is the case is because a class of pesticides known as pyrethroids are available over the counter. So if you left here and you went to Walmart or Home Depot or Lowe's or wherever, and you said, I need some flying insect spray. It's going to be some version of a pyrethroid. Well, we have a laboratory in-house where we genetically test the mosquitoes for resistance to pyrethroids. Well, Aedes aegypti just gets mad when you spray them with pyrethroids. So they say, doesn't affect me at all. The concentration that is necessary to kill them continues to rise and rise. It's very similar to the abuse of antibiotics and superbugs and that sort of thing. So the organophosphates that we have are our last, that's the last thing that we have available to us. And we work with vendors, manufacturers who are making new products, and they promise us that they're working desperately to try to find new products that are effective against mosquitoes. However, mosquito season throughout the United States isn't as long as in a lot of other places, so they won't be able to sell very much of it, and there's not enough money in it. And they don't get subsidized by the government, and so on and so on. So what happens is we have a product, I'm sure you all know, you've heard about Nailed and the controversy surrounding it. We use it extensively. We have used it extensively since early 1990s. And it is amazingly effective. It doesn't persist in the environment. It kills mosquitoes really nicely. We minimize non-target damage, but I'm not going to stand here and try to defend it either. It is a neurotoxin. It's poisonous. And I would suggest that the CDC, the EPA, and to some extent the CDC, the label is so restrictive. It's not available to the public. It's only available to professionals, and the label is so restricted that we use about a half an ounce per acre. And a half an ounce per acre is equal to about half a shot glass, and the droplet sizes are in terms of microns, 30, 40 microns. So when we fly over, we typically do more damage with the airplane than we do with the chemical, because we're noisy and we have exhaust coming out of there and so on. But I digress. So the Mansonia, the one just under Aedes tanis or Tanurhynchus can vector heartworm. That is a problem further east in Collier, freshwater. That is a mosquito that the larvae, the wigglers, they actually penetrate the roots of aquatic weeds. So water hyacinth and water lettuce, and we have plenty of that because we have agricultural runoff, which puts a lot of nutrients into the water so the plants grow and so on. As a matter of fact, some of our researchers, we were doing some research out near Ave Maria. There's an Arthrex out there, and they had a pond that was full of water hyacinth. We had this thing called an emergence trap that just counts how many mosquitoes come off per day, essentially. And we calculated that that pond alone was producing 1 million plus mosquitoes per day, every day. And it was absolutely remarkable. So they brought back some of the plants, and they had some of the larvae. And I was just in the lab, and we were chit-chatting about it. And I said, I wonder if I could get I don't have a picture of it with me, but I wonder if I could get a picture of this thing actually doing what it's said to do. So we dropped some larvae into the water, which we used clean water, and it wiggled down, went over to the root, and went, and that's how they breathe. They actually steal their oxygen from the plant until they pupate. And so trying to kill the larvae of those mosquitoes is very, very difficult, because on the surface, the plants create an environment where you can't get the product down under the plant. So unless you kill the plant, you can't kill the larvae. And then there's Cerophora. That's our golf course mosquito, affectionately known by some as gallon nippers, or big aggressive biters. Next time you smack one, you probably say, "Oh, that's a Serophora," and you'll probably be right. So, how do we do things today? We don't have smudge pots anymore, or little things to swat the mosquitoes off of you. We integrate our mosquito management program. The base of that program is having talks like this and answering your questions, public education. Source prevention, that's a little tricky. Does anybody not know that it rains here a lot in the summer? Okay. That produces source for mosquitoes to lay their eggs. So what we try to do is to say, please rinse out your bird bath, your bromeliads. Try to get rid of man-made containers. And then protect yourself with clothing and DEET and time of day, and just be smart. The notion that, I read this all the time and I kind of cringe because I understand the economic benefit, but when people say, "Come on down here, it's paradise." No, it's not. It's a swamp. It's a swamp. And it's nice. It's nice in January, right? Nice in February, whatever, cool breeze, cold front goes through. Locals always say, "Oh, I love it when it's like this, 55 degrees or whatever, no bugs." Come June and everybody's gone, you know why, right? It's air that you wear and it's very uncomfortable. And the bugs love it. Biology really cooks when it's warm. So surveillance is next up the pyramid, and that actually is ongoing all the time. We want you to submit your requests for service. We want you to tell us when you have a mosquito problem. We had a person who called one of our commissioners recently, and one of our inspectors or technicians went out and said, "Well, you've got containers all over the place, and here's how you fix this and this and this." And so this little microcosm of habitat around this lady's house is now much improved because she knows how to get rid of larvae. So that surveillance and education go hand in hand. Biological control, that is actually this material that we use called BTI. It's a bacteria. It's toxic to the larvae. And last on the top is chemical. And currently we only have two classes. We have the pyrethroids and the organophosphates. You know, to say that that is our last resort would sound silly, because in a rainy year like last year, we'll spray all through. I remember being out the night before Christmas Eve, and I was thinking, boy, it's really warm out here, and this is really bizarre. What's different? What's different is that I could see Santa Clauses and Christmas lights and everything around versus what it's usually like in the summer where it's really dark and nobody's around. But we're forced still to use the chemical sort of weapon against the bug, if you will, because we haven't caught up enough yet to be able to prevent them while being sensitive enough to the environment and the ecosystem and so on. These are real people in our laboratory here. Top left there, that's Dr. Clifton. He's our head of research. Mark Cartzenell there looking through the viewfinder. He's our entomologist of record. It's really amazing is yesterday he's on the phone. Somebody walks in with this thing of icky water and wigglers in it, and they showed it to me, and I was like, he's on the phone and he's talking, and they showed it to him, and he just goes, Culex. It's like, how does he know that? Because that's all he does. He loves bugs so much. I would say that he's a weirdo in that regard, but actually he's a very nice young man, very capable, and it's nice to know actually that you have experts like this working for the betterment of public health in the community. We also have another Dr. Lucas. She didn't make the slide. She's brand new to us. She's a molecular biologist, and you know, when she's working in the lab, you can feel the heat from the horsepower in her brain. It's absolutely amazing. So we're blessed to have a really great team. So as I was mentioning just a few moments ago here, if I go back to source reduction there at the bottom, bite prevention, and we go forward here, you're going to be the experts now. You want to, as soon as I say try to avoid being out at dusk and dawn, you might say, wait a second, that's when I walk the dog. Okay, sorry. I want you to wear heavy clothing, right? So that the mosquitoes can't pierce. So if you go out in the middle of the day with a parka on, you'll probably be in the emergency department with a heat illness, right? DEET is the active ingredient in Cutter and Off. That's an excellent repellent. Is it safe? Yes, absolutely. Once again, it doesn't say DDT up there, it says DEET. And DEET is safe for use on infants as young as 2 months old. Younger than that, what we did, my son has joined us today, and what I did when I took him out for a walk was we just put a screen over his stroller. He was sleeping anyway, he didn't care. Drain and cover. So what you want to do is reduce that source on your property. So dress is reasonable, to the extent reasonable if you're a gardener or into yard work and such, and you don't mind the sweat dripping in your eyes. Really the best thing to use is just have some repellent around. Reduce the source on your property, and there's the old days, the real old days, you'd see the crackers standing out in the sun, in the hot sun, because they knew the mosquitoes were hiding in the shade. Mosquitoes will dry out and die in the sun. As a matter of fact, when one of our epidemiologists they had a batch of mosquitoes and they wanted them dead because they wanted to, I don't know, they do gross things like take out their ovaries or whatever. They go set it on the hood of a car, and in 15 minutes they're all dead out in the sunshine. So, seems a bit odd. Yes, sir?
How does DEET work? Is it simply not like the smell of it, or is there some chemical?
It is a chemical, actually, that you see, this is the part where you have to say that mosquitoes don't think, they're just programmed. And when they're programmed to find a blood meal, the females, they're gonna go for it. However, when DEET is on your skin, it has a repellent property at the genetic level for them that they don't like it. If the concentration is great enough, then it works. And this is something I suppose I ought to go and read the history of it and where it comes from, but it is reasonably effective. If you don't like DEET or you want something natural, there's a product called picaridin, which is reasonably effective as well. Or you could use oil of lemon and eucalyptus, which makes you smell real nice, and you could, but they don't like that either. And it probably has something to do with it absolutely has something to do with the chemistry of it. When they're proboscis, they have a little needle that pierces your flesh, and it's covered by a little cover. Is that a thunderboom? Okay. When they go to pierce your skin, they have saliva that actually washes into the area. That's where the anesthetic comes from, so that you don't feel them. And that's also what causes your immune system to get that little familiar red welt and the itch. It's also that saliva that contains virus when mosquitoes can make you sick. So that whole interaction right there, mosquitoes, I remember when I was a kid, it's like, oh, let them land, and then you squeeze your muscle, you make them explode. No. There's little, and then I grew up and became a professor of anatomy and physiology, and I learned that, it's just capillary flow, and it's very low. So they actually just sort of siphon off a few drops of blood. They can actually take too much in and wind up Okay, can't fly away, but that blood is used to, the protein in is used to make eggs, so.
I heard the bounce, you know, those.
Fabric softeners.
Yeah, that can be used as a pesticide?
A repellent?
I mean, a repellent, excuse me.
I've heard that too. I think we should probably do that. We should address the myths and the facts.
Yeah.
I think that may cause an allergic reaction in some people.
Oh.
I can't recommend it.
Yeah.
It's not been proven.
Oh.
I had someone tell me that, oh, you have to put them through the dryer first.
Oh, yeah, right.
And then you have to have them in your pocket, but it has to be hanging out. And then I started thinking about ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. It's like, at what point did we leave science behind and just go with, it's kind of like, as my grandma used to do, don't give knives as a gift, and so on and so on. So all of those tales, but it's an interesting notion. I bet if you called Mr. Snuggle or Bounce or whatever, they'd probably fund a study. It may just be that it's too aromatic, too much perfume for them, but it probably has something to do with the chemistry. So, yes, sir.
Do mosquitoes have any benefit?
Yeah, that is a common question, and a lot of churches actually put, "Why didn't Noah swat the 2 mosquitoes," or whatever, on their sign. Out in the estates, actually, they had a sign that said, "Pray for mosquito control." We do know that they're part of the food chain, and although perhaps unpopular, is that being a vector for disease may be an evolutionary means by which population control is managed. Beyond that, I'm not sure. There are lots of infectious diseases and such for various species of animal and so on that can render can make them sick, and mosquitoes can make us sick and make us miserable. We don't know what eradication would do to the ecosystem. No idea.
Now, besides bats and birds, are there any other predators?
Dragonflies do eat them. Most of the larger insects will eat them. Snakes, little geckos, the lizards, they'll eat them. Yes, but they won't eat enough. They won't eat enough so that you notice a difference. When we get a call from a school that says, "We want the kids to have a bat house," and whatever, we say, "Oh, that's good, but bats can carry rabies." And rabies is pretty bad news. So they won't eat enough. If there were a means of establishing an equilibrium and a balance through the use of biological means, we would have done it. Here at Mosquito Control, we keep 2 hives of bees, mostly for public relations, because we want to prove that we don't kill bees. What happened in South Carolina was horrible. Was it a result of NALED? Probably, not sure. It's not for me to speculate, but what I will say is that if you know the habits and the biology of the bees, the gentleman who was looking through the little scope, he takes care of our bees for us. It's hilarious, actually. Sometimes he goes out there, "I'm going to go check on the bees." And then 2 minutes later, you see him running this way going, "The bees!" And he gets stung all the time. But we get honey from them, and they're wonderful, and they are good pollinators, and they're very necessary. So when it comes to other insects for biological control, it's nice, it's effective, it's a feel-good thing, but I'm telling you that the numbers of mosquitoes that we're dealing with during mosquito season, we'd have a whole lot of fat dragonflies if they could really get down to it. So, yes, ma'am.
Do you know what time of day they spray and fumigate them?
We have, when we treat the adults or adulticide, we have essentially 2 different times that we will use, depending on the species that we're dealing with and the time of year and the weather.
This time of
This time of year, it'll be after 10:30 at night, or it will be closer to just before dawn, 4:30 in the morning. We have the ability to notify you through a mobile application and on our website. You just put in your address, and we'll send you a text message.
I
Or
don't have any of that stuff.
okay, you have a telephone, right?
Yes, but I'm up I don't go out at 4 in the morning, and I don't go out after dark because I don't like museums, and when I get there, it's like this big around for months. So I don't.
Your immune system keeps you inside.
I actually, the first year I was here, my doctor had to send a prescription because it couldn't kill them.
That is becoming more common, sadly. You had a question, ma'am?
Yes, first of all, I think you do a good job. We're happy. We could not live here without you.
Oh, thank you.
For 17 years.
Mhm.
But I'm wondering, when we get these very heavy storms,
Mhm.
how do the mosquitoes and birds and everything else, how do they maintain themselves so that they are not washed away and completely gone?
That's a good question. The question was, when we get heavy rainstorms like we do with these air mass thunderstorms, how do the mosquitoes persist? How do they deal with it? Interestingly, when it is raining like that, they hunker down. They get under leaves, they get into vegetation and such, because try to imagine that you're this big and you're flying along and you get hit by a bus traveling at 100 miles an hour. That's what it would be like. So how do they persist? They're programmed, once again, to hide. They rest. A lot of folks have little areas, and usually going to your door, you'll have a little covered area, and sometimes it's like running the gauntlet, because the mosquitoes are after you every time you go through that. But what they're doing on the walls there is they're resting. And they're resting, and they're programmed for a certain amount of light to dim. In the evening, the humidity's up, the light's down, it's time to find a blood meal, and so on. The Saltmarsh mosquitoes, actually, that season wanes on its own due to those rains. It actually washes a whole bunch of eggs out into the Gulf of Mexico. And you say, well, where do they come from the next year then, wise guy? Well, the answer is that all those females, before they even leave the swamp, they lay 25 plus eggs without having a blood meal, and they get on the wind and then come on up this way. So we have a never-ending supply. We've done some research where we've taken core samples of the muck in the Everglades, and down below 6 feet or more, we're finding mosquito eggs that are viable. So when I told the news, and this was per our research department, I said, these mosquitoes are abundant in the trillions. There was a lady who responded, that's ridiculous. Maybe it is, and that's a lot of zeros, but it's true. And I haven't counted them, but I will tell you that there are places like Collier Seminole State Park. We don't measure the mosquitoes by number, we measure them by the pound. And so it's incredible. We have seen upwards of 100,000 in a trap in one night. So the fact that you have air conditioning and screens and so on and whatever is very unlike what you see in Brazil with depending on a breeze and so on. I lived in Puerto Rico for a little while, and it was the same way. You get a kind of a trade wind, you open the window, there's no screen in there. These Aedes aegypti just live with you. In our houses, we shut out the world. We have hurricane glass and so on. So how do they continue to live? They're so abundant. They're just so abundant. And if they do get washed away, they'll hatch wherever they wash away to. And then they'll come back. Yeah, it's icky, yeah, but true. More questions? Yes?
Are there any parts of Florida where they're not as bad as they are here?
Depends on the season very much. But if you go all the way back to the 1700s, Spaniards coming here, they just said that it was mosquito infested from north to south. the Big Bend and the Panhandle, they have their own problems too, but there are mosquito control districts within Florida. We get together at least once a year, and they all have a problem. So we are in a unique geographic area as far as Florida is concerned, because we're the last stop before you get to things like the Everglades and 10,000 Islands. Are they less bad in Lee County? Depends on the season, depends on the type of mosquito, but I always tell them that they have the best mosquito control program, us, because we're in the way of those bugs getting to them. And all the bugs stop right at the Collier line, right there. They turn around and come back. So to answer your question, the answer is they're bad everywhere. And a lot of areas in Florida don't have a tax base or the financial horsepower to control them. Most of the areas that are agricultural, they're pretty awful there too. Yes, ma'am.
Northern mosquitoes tend to, you can hear them coming.
Yeah.
The mosquitoes down here tend to not to make any noise. They sort of vibrate on a
They're different. Yeah. They're different species. They're actually related in terms of the genera, but the species are different. And a lot of the mosquitoes in Florida will actually go for your neck and your face and your head. And some of the speculation is because farm animals all have tails and they'll swat all of that. The tail doesn't really reach your head, so what happens is they're programmed to go here. We also have some bugs like the Seraphla, they go for the ankle all the time. But can you hear them coming? Yeah, I wonder if that's part of the humidity or just the misery factor or whatever, so. My son's stepping out.
Of a mosquito?
Depends on the species, again, but to give you some numbers, we've actually kept female mosquitoes alive in the laboratory, viable to lay a clutch of eggs for 6 months. Typically in the environment, in the field, depends on the species, but it might be a couple weeks, it might be up to a month. Some places, mosquitoes actually overwinter as adults. So, especially, we had a recent visitor from Darwin, Australia, which is very similar in terms of wet and dry to Florida. And she said that they got bugs that will overwinter as adults, similar, same problem. It's remarkable. Yes, ma'am.
I was thinking of your plants and the wiggly guys going into the plants, and the only way you can get rid of them is to kill the plant. How does when you fertilize plants, like, you know, they like lots of nitrogen, or they like magnesium, or whatever it is, how would that affect those squiggly guys? Would that make their environment too toxic for those? The plants would survive, but the larvae wouldn't?
Well, it's probably best to think of it this way, which is the fertilizer that causes the plant to thrive allows the mosquitoes to thrive in the plants. So they're not accidentally taking nutrients. That's exactly right. So they're just there for the oxygen. In terms of, if I had a jug of them, and which I wish I did, and if I get to come back I will, but you'll see larvae, they sit at the surface because they have these little siphons to respirate with, and then if you tap the jug or disturb them, they'll swim down to the bottom and they can stay down there for a while. I hope you all have your umbrellas, but when they can pierce the root of the plant, they can just stay there indefinitely until they pupate. And you'll see them actually, they'll pull off and go find something to eat, some organic material and so on. But yeah, those things that you mentioned, those inorganic materials or those organic materials that are processed by plants, if the plant is there, the larvae are there. So.
Without humor, where do you see the mosquito control in 5 years?
And I can't make a joke? No? Okay. Good. No, I see us moving in the direction of much more larviciding and continuing to push forward the science of how to get these critters down to tolerable numbers, and to continue to work with our colleagues at the Department of Health and other locations. And I see a renewal of our fleet and the technology. We have an awful lot to do in 5 years, and also what I didn't mention, our buildings desperately need repair and such. So they're.
Are you funded by property taxes?
Yes, we are a separate item. Anyone who lives in the district, when you get your tax bill, it'll say Mosquito Control ad valorem, and our millage rate it's gone up because we desperately need some repairs. But typical household in Collier, east of 41, let's say, would pay probably between $20 and $60 a year for mosquito control. We think it's worth it, and we definitely want to be more effective. And we would encourage you to come and visit us, take a tour with us. Mrs. Robin King is here. She's been so kind to watch my son. But we have, contact us if you have a group or you'd like to come and learn more. We'll show you the whole operation from our laboratory to how we do things. You get your picture taken in an airplane. So, yes, ma'am.
As far as plants, is that all plants like silver button, any type of that type of plant, no matter what it is, will have them?
No, it has to be an aquatic weed. It has to be a plant that puts its roots just into water. Cattails are one of the unique ones. They produce a lot of mosquitoes for us, but any kind of plant that has roots just in water that they can access, they will use it. Around here, it's water lettuce and water hyacinth. On the other hand, a lot of people say, well, I could buy some citronella and so on. And citronella smells very good, and it might have some positive effect, but again, the mosquitoes are so abundant that you can't just get near the citronella and hope that they go away.
I don't have any plants.
Oh.
I was going to plant silver button. I don't want any flowers with allergic leaves. So I figured silver button is just a leafy.
Sure, that'd be fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna have to make this the last question and comments.
So the water cakes work, you know, the cakes that you put
Yes, yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for mentioning that. Mosquito bits, mosquito dunks, mosquito bits. You can buy them in a jug. Looks like the same stuff that you shake and fertilize. Throw it into your bromeliads. Put it in your where you have little bits of water, and it will absolutely keep the numbers down. It won't hurt any fish or birds. Thank you for mentioning that. So
we want to thank Patrick Lynn.
my pleasure. Thanks.